Well, hello everyone. It's Daniel here with the Solid Network, and here I am with Pastor Stephen Su of Chinese Evangelical Church of San Diego. Can you introduce yourself a bit? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a second to third generation Chinese American, depending on how you count it. And I grew up in the Bay Area, lived in LA for a few years, and settled down in San Diego, where God called me into full-time ministry, and I stayed at the church that I was called in, and have been a minister there for 24 years, and 20 years as senior pastor. So that's, in brief, my ministry journey there.
It's a long time. I'm encouraged that you've lasted that long, especially for an English-speaking pastor. We always hear about stories about how they don't last long. So I'm grateful and I'm encouraged to hear about your longevity. Today we're going to be talking about encouraging people towards vocational ministry. And so I just want to ask you, hey, what have you observed about Asian Americans aspiring to vocational ministry, maybe in your experience in your circles?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So thanks for asking that, Daniel. As I think through all the vocational ministers that I know, I would say I've only met a handful that felt that they were aspiring to be a minister since they're, maybe in grade school. Most of the people that I've met were called later in life, maybe in college or after that time. And I think it's a blessing that there are individuals who have been aspiring to be a minister since their youth, kind of like Samuel.
Hmm.
But I do believe that the vast majority of Asian American ministers, they receive a call later in life to serve God, kind of like Elisha did. He was working out in the field, and then all of a sudden Elijah pops up, calls him, and he starts following. Um, I want to maybe just take a moment to share about some of the ministers at my church, CEC, and how they were called to ministry. One of them was part of our college leadership. He had been serving for a number of years, and an advisor came up to him and said, "Hey, you should consider full-time ministry. I think you have the gifts for it." And it was something that he never thought of. And it's a full-time ministry. And so he started exploring it, and then he sensed God's call to ministry, stayed at a local seminary, and he's been serving at our church for now about 10 years or so. Another person at a church, another pastor, he was studying for graduate school and didn't make it into graduate school he wanted to. So he thought, hey, maybe I'll take some time, go get an MDiv or a master's of theology just to grow spiritually. And in that very process, God called him into ministry, and he ended up serving at our church, and he's been there, I want to say it's 20 years now. And so a neat way that God called him. Another individual at our church heard it the old-fashioned way. He heard that there's a great need in the harvest field and there are very few workers. So he accepted that call and said, I'm going. And we're about to send him off this year to go into missions. And he's been serving as a pastor at a church for 10 years. Finally, it might be a person like myself where I had been secular ministry or secular work for about 10 years. Kind of did most of what I wanted to do, and yet still didn't really feel satisfied. And that's when I started to reflect upon just the things I really loved in life, and it had always been serving at church. And so I explored that, and God called me to ministry. And and so I think God calls people in ministry in a lot of different ways here.
It sounds like there's different journeys for people. Like sometimes it's like a second career, sometimes it's something that they were aspiring to when they're younger, and sometimes they have like an epiphany or some kind of like
Right.
a like maybe a maybe not audible, but they hear from God. But then sometimes they say, hey, there's a need. I want to volunteer for that. And all of
Yeah.
them seem to be different ways to get there.
Yeah. And I think especially when I think through the ministers at my church, they came through these different avenues, and yet they've been faithful to the task, and they've lasted a long time. So the calling can be from different avenues. And maybe for some of the listeners today, maybe there's even another avenue that's drawing you into the ministry. And so the calling's not the same, but I think there's aspects of the call, both internal and external, that are very, very similar. So I think those things are important too.
You mentioned earlier you don't know that many people who aspire to full-time vocational ministry. Why do you think that is, especially in your circles? And you're in a Chinese American church, but you've
Yeah.
also seen other Asian Americans, you've also seen other churches. Why do you think people don't consider vocational ministry?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I don't think the answer is simple. It's pretty complex. I believe sometimes we may, because we study hard, as Asians, we work hard at school, maybe we have this idea that, hey, maybe I'll be a Daniel at my workplace one day, or maybe I'll be a Joseph at my workplace where I have this great impact and I'll use these gifts and then I'll be a witness that way. And so I think because of that type of history, we might not be, full-time ministries just not on our radars.
Mm.
Um, I think another reason might be our parents do not encourage it. I I still don't see very many parents saying, "Hey, I want you to go into full-time ministry. You would please my heart if you went to full-time ministry." We just don't hear that. I mean, and so I think that's part of it.
Mm.
I think another reason is churches themselves. So it's our fault. I think Dr. Glenn Scorgi is correct when he says healthy churches produce ministers. When you see a ministry that's successful, when you see people enjoying ministry, I mean, it's kind of hard to not say, hey, I want to do that too, right? So I think because churches are broken, then sometimes that might discourage people from going to ministry. So I think there's all these different reasons. Um, but I'll say on the flip side, there's a tremendous joy to ministry. I was just reflecting upon it this week. I was visiting just a grandmother, and it was just like, man, that was great. Just to be with her, pray for her, share communion with her. Um, it was just so encouraging. So I think there's these little joys in ministry that maybe we don't talk about enough, but they really make ministry worthwhile. And of course, there is the great gift at the end that God has for those who give their lives over to Him.
Yeah, I there's a lot of those victories and blessings that you mentioned, and you're right. I think we need to talk about those more. And talk about them at home, talk about them at church, and just say, hey, this is what God's doing, and this is where we get a chance to be part of that. And
Exactly.
there's also the eternal rewards too that you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, now I think for some of you, you guys might be thinking, well, how do I know if God is calling me? Because the need is still there. I mean, Jesus said the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And so, if you have that question, if you don't mind, Daniel, I'll lead into there is a conference coming up where you can process this call, and it's called Render. And I'll just read out to you what we wrote on our website for those of you who are contemplating or thinking about whether God may be calling you or not. Renders for those who are contemplating the potential of entering into full-time ministry, seeking to affirm God's call for full-time ministry, or are attending seminary. Our hope is that through the mentoring, small groups, workshops, and main sessions, Render will provide greater clarity into God's call for a life in full-time ministry and the potential next steps for those who are called. And so there's this conference coming up pretty soon that I hope that all of you might be more interested in.
Uh, can you tell me a little bit more about Render? Whose idea was this? What have you seen before?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So this is Render West Coast, and it's based on this conference called Render that's in Houston, that's been going on among the Partnership of Asian American Christians in Texas. And so they run this conference every 3 years for those who are interested in ministry. And I've had a chance to speak there and seen people confirm the call to ministry through Render. Around last year, a number of us noticed that there seems to be an interest in people going to ministry, um, but there's nothing to really address that here on the West Coast. So we thought, hey, we've seen Render in Houston, we know about it, it's successful. Why don't we do something like that here on the West Coast? So a number of us got together to say, hey, let's start planning this. And I'll read off the list of guys here. So I want to just call out to them. There's Ben Poon, Clarence Chu, Jimmy Lee, John Mann, Louis Kang, Terrence Shea, Tim Lowe, and myself. So we're pastors that are up in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And we thought, hey, let's kind of put together this conference. And if you like, I can tell you a little bit more about it.
So tell me, you were talking a bit about what kind of conference is this? This doesn't seem like the average conference. It seems pretty specific. Can you tell me more about the particularity of this? Like who should be going to this?
Yeah, so I think anybody who is contemplating, hey, is God calling me potentially into full-time ministry? Or maybe you're just thinking, hey, I'm interested. I don't sense a call yet, but I just want to find out more about what ministry is kind of like. Or maybe you're a little bit further along and you just want that final kick. I just need this final confirmation from God. I'm almost ready, but I just needed just a little bit more. And this is the place. And the reason why is that we have this great speaker named Joy Chen, who's been a seasoned minister for many years from Sunset Church. He's also been a speaker with the Gospel Coalition, I think in a regional conference up in SF. And he will be our main speaker. And after he speaks, he'll speak in 3 sessions. We'll have small groups where you can kind of digest the message and think about it and process it through your small group to see how God is potentially leading you. We also have a place where you can sign up for personal mentoring. So you'll have a seasoned pastor who can speak with you. And finally, we'll have some workshops where you can hear more about specific areas. So what about balancing family life and ministry?
Mm.
What happens if I work with an overseas pastor? What is that kind of like? So I think all these things hopefully will help an individual who's thinking about ministry to know whether God's calling them or not. If God is calling you, what will be pretty neat is I believe we have at least one and hopefully 2 or 3 seminaries who will be there and so you can talk to a representative there, find out more, and just maybe take the next steps there. So I think all this is set up to help anybody who has any kind of interest in ministry to kind of maybe take the next steps. It might be through this too. I don't want to scare you that God is saying, hey, you're not for ministry, right? So this doesn't mean if you go to a conference, you're going to be a minister. So that's not the intent. But hopefully this will help you in a journey to know the answer to that question.
You said it's later this year. Can you give us some dates, time, and place?
Sure. The conference will start on Friday, July 26th at 9 a.m. and it will end the next day, Saturday, July 27th at 5 p.m. It will be held at my church, Chinese Evangelical Church of San Diego. I know hotels are expensive in San Diego, so my church is going to make a couple of our buildings available for you to stay overnight. So there's no charge with that. The charge that we do have is for registration. It's $90 if you register before May 27th and $110 afterwards. And the registration fee includes lunch and dinner on Friday and also lunch on Saturday. So it's a pretty good deal. If you want to find out more, go to renderwestcoast.com. That's renderwestcoast.com.
Thank you, Pastor Stephen. But what about people who say, hey, I'm thinking about full-time ministry, I'm thinking about pastoral ministry or the mission field, but I can't make it to Render. How would you encourage this person? What would you say that they could do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to really work through. I would say, one, do talk to the pastor at your church. that, the pastor at your church can really help guide you through things. And I think all of us as pastors are excited when people are thinking about going to ministry. You could read potentially two books. One is Am I Called by Dave Harvey, and the other one is Discerning Your Call to Ministry by Jason Allen. Both of these are great books to help you process whether God is calling you into ministry or not. If your church does have internships, or one of the things you can do is, this is probably a little bit more if you're a college student, but you can probably ask your pastor, hey, what happened? Would you be able to open an internship, paid or not paid during the summer? Let me try out ministry, kind of see what it's like. And, we did it at our church, and, two people went to ministry from that. So it's kind of pretty neat.
Well, thank you, Pastor Stephen, for your time. It's been really good to hear from you and just chat about what it means to aspire or think about vocational ministry. Just as we close, what is one thing that you would what is one thing that you would say to encourage somebody as they're thinking about full-time ministry, and not just in terms of what to do, but how would you be an encouragement to them?
Yeah, so maybe you can share a little bit more about myself here, in that, because I've worked in secular work for about 10 years before going to ministry. And I think you're always torn in secular work between what's best for the company or for your boss and what's best for God. It's not always hard to tease those two apart and kind of figure out how you can do each the best. And I found that one of the great joys of full-time ministry is that you're constantly serving the audience of one who is God. So each morning, I don't wake up dreading going to quote unquote work, but there's a joy knowing that each and every day I am going to serve God. And so there's nothing that pulls me to one side or another. It's just, here's another day to serve God. And I think the beauty of ministry is it's not about us. God can use a donkey, right? We've seen that in scripture. But it's really kind of like you get the front row seats of watching God at work. And, I don't know if you've ever been to a game before, but there's a big difference between sitting at the top row and sitting in the front row of a basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's kind of like. And when you see God working and you see that, he's doing this maybe through what you're saying, through the things you're doing, or, nothing that you're doing at all, it's just amazing. And so I think there's a sense where we do get a chance to see God, experience him in a greater way than I ever did in secular work. So I'm always thankful for that. So yeah, yes. For those who are wondering, is ministry hard? It is. It's not easy, but are the blessings worth it? Absolutely, much more so than I can ever say. And so I think that's why Daniel's doing what he's doing. I'm doing what I'm doing because, it's a blessing, And so I hope you get a chance to explore that and join us at Render West Coast. And Lord willing, maybe he'll call you into ministry, maybe not, but hopefully you'll get that answer that you're seeking.
Thank you, Pastor Stephen. Again, the conference is called Render West Coast. Pastor Stephen Su of Chinese Evangelical Church of San Diego. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Sola Network exists to influence the emerging generation of Asian Americans and those who lead them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Find our articles, book reviews, podcasts, and more at sola.network. If you would like to partner with Sola Network through collaboration, networking, volunteering, or giving, please contact us through the website.